This is Duke University.
Okay, well, I will go ahead and kick us off. My name is Grace Athey. I am one of the assistant directors here with the Duke Career Center, and we are so excited to host the event tonight for What Nobody Tells You, ChatGPT. We have four excellent panelists here with us tonight, and I will go ahead and have them introduce themselves as well. Jeremy, would you like to kick us off?
Yeah, for sure. So first of all, thanks so much to our amazing host for bringing you the session. Definitely give Grace and her team some love in the chat. Maybe even go to ChatGPT and generate a sonnet in their honor. They deserve it. And I am coming from Khan Academy, where I lead the marketing team. And we've been working very closely with ChatGPT to build out an AI tutor to help people learn around the world.
Thank you, Jeremy. Taren, do you want to go next for us?
Sorry, I was on mute. Hi, everyone. I'm Taren. I graduated from Duke in 2004, and I live in San Francisco. And I've spent my whole career at the intersection of social impact and technology. And this year I founded AI Impact Lab, which helps social impact companies and nonprofits use generative AI tools to help achieve their mission.
Thank you. Yu Bing, let's go ahead and have you introduce.
Yeah, thank you, Grace. My name is Yu Bing. I'm also based in the Bay Area, but south of San Francisco. I'm from AWS. I graduated from Duke Master of Engineering program back then. And I also attended some classes in Fuqua. Right now, I'm in AWS Generative AI Innovation Center as a principal strategist and manager. Previously, I have about 5 years of experience in in enterprise AI and machine learning, and also consulting experience from McKinsey, mostly focusing on leveraging technology for growth. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Shyamal.
Thanks, Grace. Hi, guys. I'm Shyamal. I'm an engineer on the OpenAI team, where I also lead our startup function. I work with some of the world's leading companies and developers to bring the benefits of our technology to every human on Earth. I also graduated from Duke, studied the AI for Product Innovation program, which I'm also serving as an advisory member on the board this year. So super excited to have a conversation with you guys.
Thank you so much. We're so excited to have you all a part of tonight's event. Thank you so much for volunteering your time as a panelist. And Lauren, I did not forget about you. Last but not least, we will have Lauren introduce herself, as she is helping me co-host tonight's event.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Corey. I'm a career advisor at the Career Center, and I help co-manage the data tech and engineering career community.
Yeah. Thank you, Lauren. Okay, so let's go ahead and start it off with some of the questions that we have planned. And like Lauren mentioned, yes, please drop any questions in the chat that you may have throughout the panel, and then we'll get to those at the end. We have some time allotted. So to the panelists, to what extent do you use or work with ChatGPT in your role, and what might that look like?
Oh, I will start with this question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in my day-to-day work, I don't really use ChatGPT. We're encouraged not to use ChatGPT for work function, but for my personal life, I use it a lot for acquire information before I buy a product, or if I want to learn something, I use that quite a lot. At work setting, ChatGPT is one application of a large language model using generative AI, and I'm using generative AI and I'm working in this field, so that's the connection. AWS has several models that we provide to our customers in terms of large language model or image generation model, so that's the connection here.
So I was writing a novel last year when ChatGPT 3.5 came out. And I started playing around with it for writing the novel. And I was like, I don't know if this is that useful, which, by the way, I have lots of thoughts on that now. But I was like, and I was like, I'm going to try writing a press release. And I had it write a press release. And then I was like, I'm going to try having it write an answer to a grant proposal question. And it was like quite good at that as well. And because I've spent my life, as fundraising for nonprofits and doing marketing campaigns for nonprofits, email marketing, and so on. And I was like, I think this would have literally changed the way I've done every single job in my life. And that was before GPT 4.0 came out. That was 3.5. And then when 4.0 came out, I was like, oh, okay. Like this would have definitely changed everything a job I've ever done in my life. And it's true for me in this job too. I use ChatGPT. I also use Claude. I use Perplexity, Copilot. I use some of the audio-visual generation tools as well. So it's not just ChatGPT, but like my estimate is that either they save me 40% of all the time I spend on writing, or it's somewhere between 40% of time savings with the same quality of output to no time savings, but with vastly improved output. Like that's the range that I feel like I work within for most of the work I do, like when I'm writing proposals for clients and things like when I'm creating new slide decks, that kind of thing. So yes, I use it all the time.
Yeah, I can go next. Yeah, I use it quite a lot. Of course, mostly, a lot of times to write code. I think it's, GPT-4 is really good at writing coherent code. And I think the subtle shift from the previous version of the model to, GPT-4 on ChatGPT has been going from this, knowledge repository to being like an actually reasoning engine. And so it's really good at reasoning stuff. And apart from writing code, I use it for summarizing long threads, coming up with action items from notes, things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. And Jeremy, do you have anything that you wanted to throw in there?
Yeah, just one thing that I think may be very applicable to the students and some of the staff members here. Obviously, I'm using it in this AI tutor that we're building at Khan Academy. I'm using it for marketing tasks, exactly like Taren said. But I think the big unlock for so many students is you can use it for job search. So in as much as I coach people to be really effective in finding jobs and getting access to the best opportunities, even if you're not the world's greatest communicator, ChatGPT and other AI tools can level the playing field so you can actually get access to those opportunities you deserve. And we can talk more about that as we go along.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's super insightful to hear from all of the expertises that you have to offer, the wide variety and useful uses of ChatGPT, and kind of give students a better feel for maybe different ways that they can use it, or something that maybe is slightly unfamiliar to them. So thank you for offering that insight. And kind of to touch into a few of the things that have already been mentioned, and feel free to popcorn across the panelists. There's no particular order. But for maybe students who don't have as sound of a knowledge in ChatGPT, how would you describe it to the students or even staff or faculty if they're not fully aware?
I can start. So first of all, ChatGPT is a tool or application. It is powered by foundation model from OpenAI, to be precise, large language model. So think of that as a one way to leverage generative AI to help you as application. So there's concept of this type of AI technique, which is generative AI, and then there's two type of model, largely large language model or image generation or other type of foundation model. And ChatGPT is leveraging large language model as an application that you can use. So think of that, those are structures of thinking about the concept. I'm pretty sure Shyamal has a better description there.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, to give another perspective, of course, it's an AI-powered chatbot, very good at generating human-like conversations. But I think from a different perspective, the way I think about it is in the terms of what it could become and what exactly it may be, right now in a certain format. But to me, it's a personal assistant that can be your digital coworker, companion, can be, assistant that can help you write cover letters, resumes, that can help you do job search, can teach you about new concepts. And assistant that you can customize. If you want responses in a certain way, if you wanted to play a certain role of a life coach or an educator, you can do that pretty easily, and it sort of is very personalized to you.
I assume everybody's here because for one reason or other you do think that ChatGPT is important, but I just want to emphasize that I think it's generative AI in general and this generation of large language models is going to be truly transformative to the knowledge economy and the way that knowledge work is done, and possibly to other fields as well. But in particular, what is ChatGPT? The way I describe it to people is, it's as if somebody read all of the good parts of the internet in 2021 and then went into a coma, and then woke up. Then you ask it a question and it wakes up and it answers the question as best as it can without reading the internet again, right? So it doesn't have access to the internet now, but it's the person is like very, very smart, but not in every way that people are, and sort of like knows more than people do, is also extremely eager to please and will sometimes lie to you to make you happy, but like doesn't, in some ways, doesn't have the sort of strategic sense or whatever that a human would. So you can delegate large chunks of work to like lots of the pieces of things that you have to do in a job or in whatever, to you can delegate to it, but you have to be careful about how you delegate it.
Super helpful. Thank you for that, Taren. And I feel like that's a perfect segue into what I wanted to cover next, which was, what would you say are some negatives or positives? We can cover both if you want, to ChatGPT. What are some pros and cons with this platform?
Well, I'll speak to the dark side because I'm definitely an AI fanboy and I could speak to the upsides all day long. But I think in terms of being careful about how you use it, obviously, as you write papers, as you write resumes, you've got to be really savvy. So here's the little mnemonic that I came up with. It's called ABC, which is basically when you do ChatGPT or any AI model, look out for A for the accuracy. You know, you might generate a resume or a cover letter that looks pretty good, but there might be some hallucinations in there. And I think the thing that's always going to be true is when you submit something, whether it's an assignment or a job application, you own every last word on that document and can't just say, oh, ChatGPT wrote it, blame the machine. So I think that's the first thing. Number two is bias. And bias is not just sort of bias that is specific to AI, it's bias in our society. Because as Taren said, that's where the data comes from. So for example, if you went to ChatGPT and said, tell me a story about a kindergarten teacher, chances are 9 times out of 10, that kindergarten teacher in the fictional story is going to be female. Yet I was a male kindergarten teacher. And I think it just shows that, like, because it's based on our own literature and our own evidence base, it's always going to be slanted the way that we are as a species. And then finally, watch out for confidentiality. You know, if you're putting anything into the model that is not supposed to be public, that's personally identifying information, just be careful. And I have to give OpenAI big props, because if you go into the lower left-hand corner of ChatGPT, you can actually go to the data control section and make sure that your data is not fed into the model if you don't want it incorporated. So watch out for those ABCs as you use the tool.
I can comment. So there are a ton of positive. I don't need to elaborate on that, but and on the negative side, I think largely speaking, yes, we can get a lot of efficiency and ease of access to knowledge, but we may get used to not thinking as much or studying as hard or double checking other sources of information. And it can happen to students, can happen to workers, adults, or the whole society. So that's just one thing that we need to be aware of. We talk about the species level. So maybe we're losing some creativity because we're relying on ChatGPT to do a lot of such things, where human is the best in creating things. Now we have to compete with generative AI models. So there's just one thing that we all should be aware of, not to lose some of the capabilities that we used to be good at.
I agree with everything that Yubing and Jeremy said, and also at a sort of societal level, I think there are enormous potential pros, right? So this is not about whether you're using it, but whether like we have this technology and how good it gets, right? Enormous potential advantages for people with disabilities. Like it's already being used to help make communication easier for people who have trouble speaking, for whatever reason. It's also huge accessibility around like language. So you can, you know, Google Translate is also a generative AI tool, right? And these tools make it much easier if you're a non-native English speaker and you have to go to the doctor or something like that to like communicate, or in any setting to communicate. I think some of the things I tell my clients, like when I'm working with nonprofits who hire organizers, which is a lot of the groups that I work with, like they currently, many of them have to hire organizers who can write professional level English, have historically had to do that. and not been able to focus as much on whether the organizers have deep relationships in the communities they're trying to organize. And like now ChatGPT can help with the writing part. And so they can hire a different kind of person for those jobs. And I think that's amazing, right? It's like potentially a huge, huge plus for them. On the problematic side, like I am very worried about the like potentially large changes in the economy, like very sudden, very large changes. And I think that, you know, what do we do if legal AI gets good enough that the entire legal industry transforms completely? What and like maybe for the better, right? Maybe, like, I'm not saying it's for the worse in the long run, maybe for the better in the long run, but in the meantime, you might have, you know, 100,000 people who just got out of law school in the last few years with student loans who can't get jobs. And what do you do about that? And that's just one sector. So that's something that I worry about. And then of course, like, I mean, ChatGPT itself is probably not going to be responsible for starting a war, but like disinformation, like these tools have applications for in the, you know, for autonomous weapons. Like there's all kinds of things that could go wrong at the societal level. So
Yeah, and to add to everything that's been said, I mean, of course, there's a lot of positives. I mean, what Khan is building is amazing, like having a personalized tutor for everyone at scale, you know, that can adapt to your learning style. That is amazing. But just to kind of, you know, take a step back and look at, you know, how we've evolved through several revolutions of technology, like going from industrial revolution to rise of computing in mid to late 20th century, right? It really made new skills critical for some of the students. When we had initial days of computing, that there was really more focus on STEM education, and we built out all these computer literacy and programming, and that all became common. And you know, the education adapted, you know, to prepare these students for jobs and opportunities in new tech economy. So this, you know, this 2020 and beyond, I think with generative AI, I think this is another sort of very massive shift in terms of, you know, now you have a system that can provide more instant personalized tutoring 24/7. And you know, you're kind of shifting from this rote memorization to more creativity, communication, critical thinking, and those skills are becoming more important. And even for teachers and educators to be able to focus on much higher order development. And so there's a lot of positive there. And of course, I think the technology is in the very initial phases, right? So of course, there is a problem around hallucination, which is when the model can sound very confident, but it's not always factually correct. And so still very early days in what the technology is capable of doing. And it's always good to kind of think of it as a junior assistant, where you're like giving it a task, but still you are in control of validating it, fact checking it, and making sure that, you know, it's good enough for maybe getting you 70 to 80% there, but you still have to do a lot of work in making sure it's accurate and is useful for what you're trying to do.
Thank you. All of that was super helpful. And I think you all brought up really good points of ways that we can be using this to an advantage, but then also things to be aware of in terms of the cons. And so one question I have for you is, what advice would you have for students when utilizing this platform or other similar versions, when trying to still be aware of maybe fact checking or like plagiarism or some of that bias? Like, what advice would you have for students, staff, or faculty when using this and trying to balance those pros and cons?
I can start very quickly. So I would say use it for gaining efficiency. It gets you 80% there. If you want to find references or find some you get a certain type of knowledge, but you can also ask where that reference is, and then you can double check on the fact. Definitely this will save you a lot of time, and use the time saved to go deeper and to go to the source and do fact checking. That's the advice I have.
my advice would be use ChatGPT to help you understand concepts better. It's very good at conceptual explanations. If there's something you're like, I don't understand why interest rates and inflation are tied together in this way in my economics class, like ask ChatGPT to explain it to you like you're 6. Ask ChatGPT to explain it to you using a metaphor related to animals. Ask, like, it can sort of make these leaps and connections in ways that, like, it's very counterintuitive if you think of it as a computer. It's like, that's not how computers work, right? But like ChatGPT works this way. So use it for those things. And somebody asked in the chat specifically about search engines. I would give a tip to explore if you're using for sources and anything like a search engine. I would give a tip to look at Perplexity Copilot, which is based on GPT-4, but actually gives you sources and links to their sources on the internet, so you can easily fact check what it says.
Thank you. Great advice. I think I would like to segue a little bit more into the career space specifically, since we are the Career Center and we are hosting this event. So when it comes to resumes, cover letters, CVs, what are some best practices, strategies that individuals can be using this platform for when it comes to the career documents?
Yeah, I definitely have some strong thoughts here, because I think a lot of students are using it for career stuff, but maybe using it in the wrong way for some of the things that people have just shared on the panel. I have seen students go to ChatGPT and say, write a cover letter, generate a resume template. And I think the problem with that approach is that, we have this saying in Silicon Valley, when you build a model, garbage in equals garbage out. And if you just give a very generic prompt, you tend to get a very generic response. So what I always tell the students that I coach is, hey, give it lots of specificity in terms of both what your background is and what you want. And I'll share my screen just to give a little demo here. Actually, I can't share my screen, but that's okay. I'll just walk you through it. Basically, if you imagine going into ChatGPT, you just want to come back to the two things that really matter. What's going to get my resume through the applicant tracking system? How do I get some company to even look at it? And then how do I impress the recruiter and the hiring manager, the actual human algorithm? And so if you went to ChatGPT and said, here's my resume, here's the job description, which of the most important keywords straight from the job description are missing in my resume, it can now tell you the exact things that the applicant tracking system is looking for, and says, hey, you're missing A/B testing, you're missing SQL, you're missing Python. Better get credit for those things if you have those skills. You could also ask ChatGPT, review my resume as if you were a hiring manager. What's missing in terms of clear outcomes and quantitative impact? And because it's able to sort of look through it with that lens, it can say, hey, you don't have a clear sense of what you actually drove in this internship or in this volunteer experience. What if you added some quantitative data to make that more clear to the hiring manager? And so just like a great coach like Grace or Lauren, ChatGPT can help you out on figuring out what really matters to those various criteria.
I'll bring another perspective. Besides trying to figure out how you can get a job and how you can polish your resume or cover letter to get a job, there's a lot of things you can do to figure out what job you want to have. What industry has uptrend. You can even check on the salary or geographic distribution of certain job according to your major. So there's a lot of things you can do with ChatGPT, not just preparing something after you know. It's very powerful for you to do the upfront research.
Yeah, and just to add to what you said, talked to a lot of students who've, used it as a tool for drafting, refining resumes, cover letters in various formats, where, they ask ChatGPT to generate like a very good first draft using some relevant, keywords, and putting the job description there and finding the right action verbs to use that may be picked up by the job tracking systems. I think that's very, useful to treat it as a very starting point. Of course, it's not going to perfectly capture your unique voice and experiences, right? So use the draft to inspiration and then build down and refine it in your own ways that really authentically represents you, right? I think same thing for cover letters is, again, it can be very good for first draft reviews, or even if you have a cover letter, it can, critique and find out what are the things you need to improve. And then you can use that critique to, again, prompt ChatGPT on what it could improve, and then write a new version. So it's really good at this, like, self-reflecting on its own content and then using its critique to then write a better version of it. If you don't have a perfect prompt, you can ask ChatGPT to write a prompt for you. So, ask it to be a career coach and ask it to write a prompt that you can use further to actually draft a resume or cover letter. I find that pretty useful as well.
Would any of you say that we have recruiters or companies who are easily identifying what resumes or cover letters are coming through their applications that are created by ChatGPT? Is that something that we've heard or seen be an issue, or what should students be doing to make sure that they're still tailoring that document outside of just using it to create a draft? We all know that there may be that one individual who tries to just like copy and paste from ChatGPT. And so what can we do here to navigate that space to make sure we're being ethical and true to ourselves in terms of submitting those application materials?
I haven't had that many conversations about this, but the conversations I have had, the employers are kind of like, I don't know if we're gonna be able to tell if people are doing this. And I was like, well, if they're able to do the work you need them to do and they're using ChatGPT, that seems fine, right? Like if they can, it's a lot of employers I work with do like take home tasks as a second or third round. And it is an interesting question for them, because what I've been telling them is actually you may not be filtering anymore for who's able to do the task at some level. You might be just filtering for who has already learned how to use ChatGPT. But like if they can do the task, then they can do the task. Maybe that's fine. I guess I don't think the ethical question is different. Like if they say you shouldn't use ChatGPT, then you shouldn't use ChatGPT, right? Yeah, I'll pause there.
Yeah, I just want to second what Taren said, because like here's the view from the hiring manager's position. Like when I hire marketers at Khan Academy, it would be totally hypocritical of me to say, oh, I caught you using ChatGPT on your application, because the day after they're hired, guess what tool I expect them to use on the job? Oh, it's ChatGPT. And I think more and more, just like calculators, computers, the internet, this is going to be a must-have technology that everyone must know. And so if you're expected to use it in the job, it's going to be okay to use it in the job application process. That being said, be that savvy student who's using it the right way, coming up with a really nice blend of your original ingenuity and the power of the technology, versus I am already seeing lots of cookie cutter templates that clearly came from ChatGPT because they're 8 paragraphs long and they are boring. So be specific, make it unique to yourself, take advantage of the best of human and technological ingenuity.
And by the way, I would just add to that, like, yeah, like if you're just copying and pasting from ChatGPT, then you're probably not actually gonna be very good at the job, right? You want to show that you're gonna be good at the job. And like one of the ways to do that is to edit it yourself and so on. Another way to do it is for you to write a first draft and ask ChatGPT to polish it. That works really well. For me, it depends on whether you're the type of person who has a blank page problem or not. I don't, so I write the first draft and then say polish it. But another way to do this is to be really smart about how you're prompting. Like if you just say to ChatGPT, write me a cover letter, it's going to write a bland, generic, boring cover letter that is well written. It'll be very well written, but it'll be bland and boring. If you say, write me a quirky cover letter that highlights like these 3 things about myself and references, some sitcoms or something, you give it something that's like not the same prompt that everybody else uses, then it's going to stand out. So, or like, or it could be something about the employer, like, that the employer likes these things, make sure you reference these in the cover letter, or like make it funny, or may write it, I don't know. So I think be creative with how you're prompting and you're going to stand out too.
Yeah, I would say ChatGPT or any language model is a powerful tool. It's just like grammar correction that we didn't used to have when we have to do handwriting, and now it's all typed and printed. So it levels the playing field. So learn how to play in this new platform. Prompt engineering, the prompt that you give to the model is the real substance. It's your differentiator. They can make the language very polished, but the real skill set, the real thing you have done in your previous work or in your study is the real thing that will be there. So so far, no one is using ChatGPT for resume reviewing, or well, maybe that's the case, but at least not for interviews, right? So you do the polishing, you still need to talk to a human, you still have to talk about what you have done. So the same capability that will make you shine in eventually getting the job is not just the resume, right? So there are a lot of things you need to consider. There's still your core, so-called core competency or substance that you need to build, even with the same tool.
One thing I'll add to that is, again, in a lot of our interviews, and we have a bunch of, take-home projects, we do expect candidates to use ChatGPT, and are thrilled to hear when they use it for brainstorming, and to an extent, if they can even provide the prompts that they're using, it even, helps us kind of evaluate how they're thinking about this problem, what are the right questions they're asking. One thing I'll say is, the reason, right now a lot of AI detectors don't really work, right, for tools that are able to differentiate AI versus human content. But I think it's much easier to spot if something is missing, a human touch, authenticity, and sort of personalization versus not. So it's much easier to actually, or it'll become much easier to spot human-generated content than AI content. So when you, at least for me, if I read through a lot of ChatGPT outputs, it's much easier to spot something that is not still quite missing something, and it's kind of repeating itself in a loop. So it's always valuable to add your own sort of authenticity, voice, and work more on personalizing that and tailoring to your use cases.
Sorry, I know I've already answered this question twice, but I have one other thought, which is, you are in a weird moment right now. If you're applying for jobs right now, it is a weird moment to be doing that. Like, I think in 2 years, there'll be pretty established norms about how you use these things in job processes, and every employer will be on board with what we've been saying of like, well, we want you to use it in the job, and so we want you using the application process too. That's not actually how most employers feel right now, I don't think. I think the majority of employers haven't really thought about it that much. The majority of small businesses, probably big corporations probably have, but small businesses really haven't grappled with this. And you may encounter some like reactions that are pretty negative if people either suspect or know that you're using it. So I don't think we should be flippant about that. Like, I think people don't know what to think about this right now. So you may want to tread carefully in some cases.
All of that was super helpful. I think that's a perfect segue to what are the best practices here for our audience, students, staff, faculty, to use this platform ethically. What does that look like? Are there strategies you would recommend, best practices? How can we make sure that we're treading carefully, lightly? I mean, Taren, you just said perfectly, like, obviously there are some cases where this is going to be appropriate and maybe other cases where this is not. So knowing your audience, what are some strategies here that we can use to be ethical with this platform?
I think the ethical part of the guideline resides in your mind at this point. You still need to make your own human judgment on what's ethical, what's not, and use it properly with your just common sense. If you're talking about, well, ethical level is always different than legal level, right? So even the legal field, we're still building. There's a lot of uncertainty. There's still new things that people are considering. So really, this is a powerful tool. Use it with your best judgment.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, like, be transparent if you use, ChatGPT suggestions in work, and cite it appropriately in cases where you're allowed to use it, whether it be, job applications or interviews or essays. Make it very clear, like, what content is yours versus what came from ChatGPT, and make sure you are upholding that integrity and academic honesty when using these tools. And again, the goal should be developing mastery, right? Like, focus on using ChatGPT to help you really learn and strengthen that knowledge and skills, and not just like completing assignments. And the end goal should be really developing that mastery and experience, because that will really help you on the long term.
I think that the disclosure, if you're disclosing, then you're doing a great job. And it's also, I think it's not always clear how you would disclose, like, I co-wrote this, like, it's not like this paragraph was written by Ed and this paragraph was written by me, right? It's kind of tricky. It's like, I use ChatGPT to help me write this is like more the common case for me. The other ethical thing, which nobody's talked about, and I think some people really do have, there's a lot of ethical concerns that I've heard around visual content generation, like and even in music as well, but that Midjourney and DALL-E and so on, that they used artists' work without permission to train these image generators, right? And there's a legal question of whether that is what's called fair use under copyright law. And there's also an ethical question of whether that's okay. People talk about this more in the image generation space, but it actually applies in the large, it's like the issues are totally parallel in the large language model space. So there's, ChatGPT, all of the large language models, Claude, they were all trained on the writing of real life humans who did not in any way like explicitly opt into that. There are lawsuits right now with some authors suing OpenAI for doing that, for using their books for the training and so on. There's different forms of ways of like that are cropping up of being able to opt out of that training. So like OpenAI just announced DALL-E 3, which is an image generator, and says that they provided a way for artists to opt out of their work being used in the training. That's a different level of ethical consideration that I think is just worth knowing about and developing, as Yubing said, like it's you have to make your own ethical decisions. I can't tell you what the right things are and aren't that you should be worried about. There's a question of like inevitability, kind of like, is it inevitable that these technologies are going to be accepted with these, under the current intellectual property landscape? Are some of them going to get banned? Are some of them going to have to get retrained with cleaner data sets? These are all like, it's a really emerging field. And these are all like super, if you're a law student, got some very interesting things to talk about these classes. So, I mean, about these tools. So yeah.
No, that's all really, really great. Thank you all so much. What are your thoughts on how GPT and other LLMs are changing the way we think about language as a whole? An example being, if I use GPT to convert bullet points into a formal email and the receiver uses GPT to convert that email into bullet points, then what is the point of the formal email in the first place? Would anyone like to address that question that came in?
I clearly remember there is a comic on this. Two people behind the computer, and one is entering something, bullet points, and then generate a large article, and it says, "Oh, great! Look at this, generated this," and the other one receiving it and saying, "Oh, look, it summarized to succinct points." That it always comes up to my mind. So I guess the question is how we think about language. We still need to have that skill set ourselves, right? It lowers the bar for you to do many things for the native language that you speak, or get to know new languages. But it's similar to my prior point. Maybe it's easier and we get more lax because like these days, maybe I cannot do handwriting as well. I type well, right? I don't know. I can miss a letter or so when I write it, but I miss the skill set because you use computer so much. So those are the things that we just have to be aware of. And for us now, you're either already in college or maybe graduating. That may be less of a consideration, but for the future generation, it is a big thing that we need to make sure the babies today and the toddlers and children today, how do they maintain this language capability? So that is a bigger problem that we all face as a human species.
Thank you, Yubing. That was super helpful. And this has kind of already been touched on a little bit, but what intersection do we see here between ChatGPT cover letters or resumes or personal statements, whatever that may be, being scanned by JobScan or other reviewing AI, like essentially AI reading AI? What are your guys' take on that, I guess? If that's even a thing.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Grace, because I've been thinking about that too. And I think, like, it's what I said in the chat. which is recruiters have been using these AI tools, obviously in a more simple format, for the last 2 decades or more. And as a result, we as candidates, we as job seekers, didn't always have a level playing field because we were kind of flying blind into this new world. I think this just levels the playing field. This just says, hey, instead of focusing on these relatively arbitrary and artificial things that really test how much you know about job searching, not how much you know about doing the job, not how good you would be in the job, could we actually clear away some of those barriers so people who are really awesome at being data scientists or programmers or whatever the job is get a chance to have that opportunity, even if they're not the world's best cover letter writers? Because again, that's largely irrelevant to being a great programmer. So I think in some ways, this is actually a huge step forward and a way for students to have a level seat at that table.
Thank you. I appreciate that insight. It's definitely an interesting concept. I know that there's other versions of JobScan out there in terms of platforms that are reviewing, like ATS softwares, essentially review resumes or cover letters. But Priyanka, I see your hand raised. Do you have a question for us?
Yeah, I had a small question. So I've been reading about the progress of ChatGPT, and I do see that ChatGPT 4 has a lot more parameters than the initial ChatGPT 3.5. I had a question on how, like, in developing such a big model, and in a sense, these models are a black box. You don't really know how it's learning, what it's learning. I wanted to know how the developers kind of control that it's learning the right thing, and how do they uh, control the error of sometimes when ChatGPT gives a wrong answer confidently.
Yeah, I can take that one. I think I'm assuming you mean developers as in people using the models. I think it's
Yes.
hard. I think instructions is, a custom instruction system prompts that you provide as part of the API or as part of the prompt is one way you can control the behavior of these models. But still, these are non-deterministic, right? And it's much harder to make these models deterministic. In terms of the errors, it goes back to like your specific use case. If hallucinations are taking a form of creativity for a use case, that's, for long form generation, content writing, etc., that's a positive thing. But if you're using it for use cases that are high risk, you have no error for hallucination, then you need to actually make sure you have some context given to ChatGPT addition to your prompt to make the responses grounded and more factual. And that's how you do, one, detect errors, detect contradictions, and like I mentioned, the self-reflection loop of, having ChatGPT kind of critique its own answer and getting another pass really improves its, subsequent answers. So that's kind of one way to control for the behavior is through instructions and correct for errors through grounding its responses, making sure it's able to, cite from the grounded knowledge that you give it. And then also asking it to critique its own response.
Yes, I've tried that before actually on asking ChatGPT, are you sure or are you completely sure about that answer? And I do feel that it's very interesting how ChatGPT is able to kind of think about it again and then come back to an answer that makes more sense. Yeah, thank you.
One question that came in through chat that's kind of being chatted about right now, but if anyone has additional insight, feel free to chime in. What are the best resources or ways to continuously develop skills in using LLM as the technology continues to develop?
I follow a bunch of newsletters on Substack. Other people use Twitter or whatever. I think basically pick a social media platform that you already check regularly and go join a bunch of groups or follow a bunch of people who use AI and talk about it. That's my number one tip. So like I'd use Facebook already regularly. So I join a bunch of prompting groups on Facebook and I'm like, oh, like I didn't know about that Midjourney feature. Like now I'm going to go try that out. It's just a way of like organically learning things during my day. The other thing I would suggest is if you have some money, there are actually some quite good cheap classes online The best ones that the combination of best and cheapest class online that I've found is called growthschool.io. And the reason it's so cheap is because it's run out of India. It's Indian staff running it. And they've got like a ChatGPT for management consultants class that I took that was $25, and I learned a lot from it and so on.
What is a feature of ChatGPT that you believe more people should know about?
I'll say that if you do have access to ChatGPT Plus, their advanced data analysis feature allows you to upload a CSV or a spreadsheet and actually have it run Python to basically start to do data analysis, creating pie charts, creating correlations to understand what's happening with your data. However, even if you don't have that, check out Claude from a company called Anthropic, where you can also upload attachments and do maybe not quite a sophisticated analysis, but at least get a sense of what's possible in the data science space beyond just pure text-based AI engagement. I'll put a link to that into the chat.
Many people may know this, but ChatGPT can do simple charts and tables. So you may already know, but it's also a useful thing to ask. The charts that they draw may look like a DOS interface, and sometimes depending on what it is, but it's actually a good visual.
Yeah, I think to add to that,
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
the advanced data analysis is my favorite tool. So you can, execute code on a sandbox environment. It can do very simple data analysis tasks for you. It can even edit like simple images for you. We also launched DALL-E 3 in research preview, so that I'm really excited for that to, come to ChatGPT. So you would be able to like write any prompt, and then ChatGPT can kind of enhance that prompt and then give you really hyper-realistic, beautiful images. So that's going to be, one of my favorite features as well.
And I would mention for ChatGPT specifically, I'd mention custom instructions, which basically means you don't have to repeat yourself in every prompt. You can like tell it who you are, what kinds of jobs you're applying for, what your writing style is. You can be like, always write in a succinct, information dense way or something like that, and it'll change it, and then that'll just be the default instead of having to say that every time.
Super cool. One of the questions that came into the chat was, what potential effects might arise from the deployment of multiple LLMs when employing them collectively for one task?
I can take a stab at this. First of all, you may not want to do that. If you want to do one task, it could be multi-model, meaning that there is text, there's image, so you need multiple models. But if this question is just on LLM, then that probably doesn't apply. There are cases, so there's a variety of models out there. Some models are large. Of course, we're talking beyond ChatGPT. It could be Cloud, it could be other models from AI21 Labs or Cohere. So each model has its own characteristic. Some are small and nimble and easy to fine tune and easy to use and less cost to use. Some models are large, it's powerful, but it's costly and it's long response time. So if you're thinking about the enterprise use for those models, you really need to figure out which model is best suited for your task. And at this early stage of the development, every 2 months or so, there will be some new models coming out, and it's really powerful. So you don't want to, you want to have a flexible architecture so you can easily swap in and out the models if you really want to experiment. So I think there's a lot of things to think about when using multiple models, but doing one task using multiple models, I don't know if that's the best way to do it in production. But if the task has several distinct characteristics, some needs to have a large model, some needs to have a smaller model, then you maybe need to have an algorithm to decide which model to call in certain cases.
There's another question that I want to make sure we get to. There may be others, but I want to make sure we are respectful of everyone's time. Are you in favor or opposed to LLM censorship? If a completely uncensored version of GPT-4 were released, how do you think it would change the way it is used?
I don't know if you could add a little color on what censor mean here. And there's a different level of looking at it.
Hayden, I would love to hear if there's something specific you were looking for here. Feel free to drop in the chat or come off mute if you would.
Absolutely. I've noticed that, or I personally like to use language models for, I guess, creative endeavors, or just like playing around with characters. And learned a little while back that a feature of AI is using role play, and that can be used for like all kinds of things, like I don't know, like role play as a critic and look at this, or just role play as this character. And if I'm writing a story, then I'll be able to have a conversation with this character, which is really cool. But like you said, if you don't really give it specific instructions or things like that, it can be kind of bland in its responses, or it might make like a generic character when you're doing kind of that. And when I've like done research and looked at like how people talk about this, they talk about the censorship of like, maybe it's not willing to talk about or to like express an opinion on realistic topics. Whereas if you want to make a realistic character that actually has opinions on topics, then it would prevent you from doing that. And similar things like that.
I mean, look, I think there's a massive debate about whether open source or closed source models, which one's a better path for the world. Like the EU has proposed legislation that would make it much harder for open source models to be released. And generally, like, I don't know, people in my world generally think open source good, right? Just like ethically speaking, like we like open source. But if we want to be careful about what kinds of models are out there in the world and which models are going to like help people write racist crap all over the internet, and which models are going to help people create super viruses, and which models are going to run wars and stuff, then so like I don't actually have a dog in this fight. Like I think it's a very tricky question. If I were OpenAI, I would definitely be censoring it as you are. But I also think we are going to have, I mean, there already are powerful open source models out there, and the open source models are going to get more powerful. In the world of image generation, Stable Diffusion is open source, and Midjourney and DALL-E are not. And Midjourney and DALL-E will not let you generate child porn, and you can generate child porn on Stable Diffusion, and that is becoming a real problem. So like, and also if we leave all power centralized in the hands of big tech companies, then that has its own problems. So
the other thing I will add to that is language model or like foundation model provider are actually recognizing that they have some, especially the proprietary models, they have certain licensing agreement so that you cannot use it in certain risky situation or bias situation and certain sensitive industry. Right. For example, healthcare and financial services, for example, cloud from Anthropic, you have to, in order to request access, at least from AWS Bedrock product, you have to specify what use case you're using it for before they grant you access. So I think model provider are trying to do the right thing and provide guardrail.
Yeah, and to add to that, I think with the proprietary models, a lot of safety is, baked into the model itself and other moderation techniques, so that make sure, it doesn't output, things that are hateful, threatening, harassment, self-harm, all of that. And in that case, these are only getting better. And there's always an issue of over refusals, right? Where it refuses more than it's supposed to. And definitely erring towards the side of refusing content, which it seems, which could be harmful. But I think we're going to be in this world where like there's going to be hybrid open source models. I think open source is great. The scarier part is like we don't have much regulation here, and regulation is moving much slower than we'd like to. And we as OpenAI, like we've been pushing for it since years, and finally we're getting some momentum. But I think once we have some regulation around like how are these models regulated beyond a certain size of compute, certain size of like training, I think people will feel much more comfortable. And we're getting to a place where like models like Llama two are very close to, GPT, the previous version of GPT. And that's always gonna, we're on that exponential, and that's always gonna be true. We might have a model, an open source model that might be very good as GPT-4. And so, yeah, I think it's a tricky thing because, we don't have regulation yet. So even, I don't think anybody would feel comfortable in a world where we don't have regulation and anyone, even state actors, could have access to these powerful models. Like, that would be a bad thing. And so I think the hope is over the next 6 or 1 year, we should have better answers to this.
Amazing. Thank you all so much. I know we have reached time. So Taren, Yubing, Shyamal, and Jeremy, we are so grateful to you joining the Duke Career Center tonight for the event. And attendees, thank you so much for your participation and the questions and interaction that you had. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to myself or Lauren. We would be more than happy to help you through the Duke Career Center. And I hope that you all have a wonderful evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Good night, everyone.